When I started school in Hamilton, I spent a couple months looking around for a church that clicked with me. Eventually, I ended up at Westdale United, whose minister, Reverend Andy, was also the ecumenical chaplain at McMaster. That first Sunday, he preached on this very story. The main thrust of his argument, as I remember it was 2 years ago, was that if we find ourselves needing to make excuses for Jesus' behavior, we should probably look instead at if his behavior really deserves excusing. Is it ever justifiable to call a worried mother a dog because of her nationality? I really don't think so. Andy's sermon came at the perfect time for me. During these first few months, I was surrounded by evangelical Christians who really monopolized campus Christian spaces, and so I felt quite constrained in my thinking. Jesus being anything other than perfect was unthinkable in that environment. So, Andy's distinctly non-evangelical, unflinchingly honest reading of the text felt like permission for me to think outside of the constraints of campus Christianity, boxes that kept clashing with my United Church upbringing. So that's where I'm going to start today. That's my foundation. Jesus was being honest throughout this interaction. He was honest when he refused her. He was honest when he insulted her. He was honest when he healed her daughter. He changed his mind when he was confronted by his hysterical mother. What he did wasn't justified, but he then turned towards a better path. So our question for today, having started with that foundation, then becomes, what can we learn from this? And I think that the key lesson to take from this passage is that the encounter with the real person in front of you dissolves the boundaries of abstract justice, boundaries which segregate those we should and those we should not help. And to show this clearly, first going to turn us towards the horizon of human evil, the Holocaust. Part 1. Normative Structures. The most normal man in the world murdered millions with but a black pen. Adolf Eichmann, a high-level Nazi bureaucrat, was tried and executed for war crimes in 1962 for his part in the murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. His trial, and the international media frenzy it created, brought the Holocaust into public consciousness. Yet Eichmann was an odd antagonist. When we think of a bigot, we tend to think of someone like a raving madman, consumed by hatred and irrationality. We think of someone who despises others for the color of their skin or the place of their birth. We think of Indiana Jones villains laughing maniacally before the hero comes in to take them out. But when that caricature, and it is a caricature, becomes our normal bigot in our minds, we have exchanged reality for fiction. People in the world have become monsters in our minds. Yet when Eichmann came on stage, he didn't have knife scars or a broken nose. He was an objectively boring man, not particularly bigoted, nor particularly cruel, nor intelligent, nor fanatical. He was an office worker, with a decent work ethic and a desire to conform. As one of the psychologists who evaluated him concluded, his only oddity was how normal he was. As Hannah Arendt, a Jewish philosopher who covered his trial, wrote, Eichmann exemplified the banality of evil. In other words, evil is not accomplished through villains. Evil is accomplished through normal people. Normal. What does it mean to be normal? We naturally think of normal as meaning average. Take a random sample of the population, divide it up, there's your normal person. But if you think about it for a moment, that doesn't really make sense. If normal equaled average, a normal Canadian is a mixed-race 42-year-old male-female hybrid with 0.9 kids who's Catholic Monday through Thursday, Protestant on Friday, and an atheist on the weekend. I have never met an average person, and I don't think you have either. So if normal doesn't mean average, what does it mean? Well, the word normal comes from the word norm, which means a standard or a rule. A normal person is better thought of as a default, a mold we're supposed to fit, or else we are abnormal or different. There are a bunch of examples, But a really easy one is that you will often hear people ask, why did this character have to be gay when discussing a movie or a TV show? Well, no one would ever ask, why did this character have to be straight? Subconsciously, we are assuming that a normal person, the default person, is straight. A gay character is quite literally queer. In other times and in other places, the norms were different. For example, in ancient Greece, the normal person was a bisexual male. Okay, so I was talking about Jesus, and then about Nazis. Now I'm at what do words even mean? I promise I am going somewhere with this. So far, I've dealt with one relatively benign implication of norms and normal, gay people in the media. But as you've probably guessed, if we look at Nazism in terms of norms, interesting things start to happen. Eichmann was perfectly normal. We now know that means he conformed to the expectations of those around him. He fit the mold, he fit the norm. He didn't question the system. See, Nazism, and in fact most, if not all, political ideologies, acts as a normative system, a system of standards governing our actions and interactions. Normative systems give you rules for behavior based on who you're interacting with and in which situation. Boring example, you meet someone carrying heavy boxes to a door, the normative system of politeness tells you, open the door for them. Simple enough. But notice you could both be replaced by robots in this example. When you meet the other person in a normative system, you aren't acting based on this encounter of unique individuals, you and they, but based on how your roles collide, identity to identity. If you obey the system, it says, if you fit the norm, you are good. If you disobey, you are evil. Heroically sacrificing yourself to kill the enemy? Good, according to Nazism. Sheltering a Jew? Deep sin. Telling the secret police about your gay neighbor? Well done, citizen. Being the gay neighbor? Abomination to the camps. Nazism didn't succeed because of the fanatics, those actually convinced of the truth of Nazi doctrine. They were few. Alone they couldn't have done pretty much anything. No, Nazism lived on the backs of normal Nazis, those who simply accepted the norms given to them because of selfishness or fear or ambition, obeying this new morality that was the annihilation of actual goodness. They replaced morality with norms, relationship with rules. And because of this, people allowed themselves to offload responsibility for their own actions onto the system. This was essentially Eichmann's argument at his trial. I was just doing my job. It's not his fault, he argued, but those of his superiors who ordered him to do it. And so the usual Nazi excuses begin. But I'm tired of excuses, and I'm tired of speaking about fascists. So let's move on. Part 2, Facing the Other. Okay, so I've brought together the Nazi stuff and the word stuff. Normative systems can serve to smother morality and responsibility. There's the conclusion. But what does this have to do with Jesus? And more pressingly, what does this have to do with us? Well, I am certainly not trying to say that Jesus is acting like a Nazi here, because one, he isn't, and two, no one should be compared to Nazis if they aren't actually Nazis. That comparison always trivializes Nazism. No, I brought in the Nazis because I wanted to start big, to start at the limits of human immorality, to show the power and the danger of norms very clearly before I shrink the conversation down to the usual and the particular. Normative systems run the world, from politeness to legal systems to military honor to company policy. It should be pretty obvious, then, that they aren't essentially bad. Most of our decisions will be made based on some kind of normative system, moral, institutional, or otherwise. Our brains simply can't handle the constant anxiety that having to make every decision unguided would create. But the danger of normative systems still remains, as shown in the German tragedy, the destruction of relationship and of responsibility. And it is here that we return to Jesus. In our story today, the disciples asked Jesus to send the woman away, which in the Greek implies to heal her daughter so that she would stop bothering them. However, Jesus refuses, which is kind of noble in a way, standing up to peer pressure to defend your values. If only his values weren't being exclusionary, it'd be a pretty cool message. But Jesus' reasoning here, and let's analyze it closely, is specifically theological. I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. He's trying to fulfill this biblical prophecy. This is the starting norm of his discussion. The world is divided into Jew and Gentile. The woman does not belong to those that he is here to serve, and so, like it or not, it's not his place to heal her daughter. Her daughter's suffering does not create a moral responsibility for Jesus. But again, the woman presses the issue, diving before Jesus' feet. Lord, she addresses him, heal my daughter. She has now completely preached the norm of politeness, which was very important at the time. Imagine someone hounding you like that in the street. She is not going to let Jesus ghost her, not when her daughter's life is on the line. Now, Jesus no longer has the privilege to roll up his windows and drive by, to only address his disciples about the issue. Now it's her he has to address. Her he must confront, no longer a Canaanite, like concept, now a person in front of him crying. Still, he presents his theological argument to her. Well, it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And let's ignore the yikesness of that metaphor for a second, and pay attention to the reasoning behind it. It's not fair, it's not just. Jesus isn't saying that her daughter doesn't deserve help. He thinks that it would be unjust for him to be the healer, because if he healed her, he'd be neglecting his children, Israel. Is Jesus being racist here? No, and a bit yes. No, because he's not conforming to our caricature. He doesn't hate her. He doesn't resent her audacity to jump before him. The fact that someone like her is here in front of him. It's nothing like that. The fact that he actually even answers her at all, that he addresses her as if he was addressing the Pharisees, the respected teachers of the law, shows how much he respects her as a person. Jesus isn't racist because he's not hateful here. But still, all of his nice moral-sounding reasoning is allowing a child to suffer because of their nationality. Jesus is not racist, but his normative system, usually a wellspring of goodness and justice, is here creating racist results. However, while the system might justify his refusal, the teary eyes of the desperate mother do not care for systems or norms or philosophy. She will not let Jesus get away with writing her daughter off as only a Canaanite. That's why her response is so powerful. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. She takes Jesus' system and she throws it back at him. There is enough food for the children and the dogs, she's saying. There's enough Jesus to go around for everyone. She definitely reconciles Jesus' Jewish-focused mission with a policy of justice for all, echoing God's promise to Abraham back in Genesis. All nations on earth will find themselves blessed through your descendants, the Jews. And so God's love is expanded in this encounter, normative system giving away to the ethic of a grieving mother. Great is your faith, Jesus praises. Go home, your child is healed. Through the faith, the stick-to-itness of a Canaanite mother, her child is saved, and through their encounter, Jesus' vision is widened. Relationship has overcome rules. Morality has broken systems. Conclusion. The question I posed at the beginning of this sermon, long time ago, I know, the fundamental question to all philosophical and biblical study, in my opinion, was what can we learn from this? What does this passage mean in and for our lives? And the answer I've come to is that, just like Jesus, we must always remain open to the presence of the other and the possibility that they will unsettle our ideas of normal. Because we need these ideas. Without norms, we fall into anxiety and nihilism. We can't throw them away. Those are not fun states to be in. Our brains can only handle so much decision-making in a day. Sometimes, most of the time, we need to be on autopilot. But we have to be careful. We must never confuse our concepts of goodness with goodness itself, nor let these concepts overtake the actual person in front of us. Jesus changed his mind today. We, infinitely more fallible than Jesus, must also be ready to do the same. We must hold on to this anxiety, this am I being just? Let it be the background radiation to our thought, and let it change us in the ways the Spirit deems needs changing. May we walk in a spirit of justice and openness, in fellowship with all the world. Amen.